Welcome to the Patient Perspectives content series presented by the Exon 20 Group, an ICAN organization. The Exon 20 Group was founded in 2017 by the visionary brothers Bob and Kevin Hanlon. Led by Chairman Bob Hanlon and ICAN CEO Marcia, the Exon 20 Group provides one-to-one patient navigation, oncology nursing services, clinical trial matching, and a vibrant community for patients and families living with EGFR or HER2 exon 20 insertion non-small cell lung cancer. In memory of its resourceful and generous leader, Kevin Hanlon, this charitable organization excels at improving patient outcomes, quality of life, and through its International Research Consortium is determined to cure exon 20-driven cancer. Visit us at exon20group.org. This video is supported in part by both ICAN and the Jackie Banana Foundation. The Jackie Banana Foundation was created by Jackie Chu, an NSCLC patient and world traveler who wanted all patients to have access to life-saving treatments. A 501c3 charitable organization, the JBF provides financial support to patients and families seeking treatment or bucket list travel far from home. Visit Jackie at JackieBanana.com. Last and certainly least, I'm Taylor, a cancer community advocate and patient navigator. I'll be your host for Patient Perspectives, where we will be diving deep into treatments, diagnostics, and experiences for an in-depth patient point of view. It's important to note that this is not medical advice. This content is provided for educational and informational purposes only. We at the Exon 20 Group and ICAN urge anyone seeking medical advice to consult with a licensed physician. Peggy Dennis, you're a prominent voice in the cancer community and an expert here in the Exon 20 Group. We're going to cover a variety of topics today, from next-generation sequencing to Mobocertinib to ENHERTU. But let's get started. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, let's see. I was diagnosed in 2016 with stage 4 non-small cell lung cancer. Before that, I had a 26-year career in private practice as a licensed and certified massage therapist. After years before that in the business industry, and decided I wanted to do something different and make a different kind of impact with people. So at the beginning of really when massage therapy was starting to be better recognized as a therapeutic modality, I went to school, got my certification. Shortly after that, which was really fun for me, I was asked to be on the sports massage team for the Denver Broncos football team. And so that was really impactful for my career. And so I spent 26 years in private practice, specializing anywhere from working with professional athletes, cyclists as well, football players, to just the elderly, and working with mobility and chronic pain became something that I specialized in. I worked with cancer patients during that time, and also specialized in a body-centered trauma therapy. So for people with PTSD or trauma-related issues, I incorporated that into my practice. So somatic experiencing is the name of that. So when I was diagnosed, it felt like a slap in the face. First of all, it's like, what are you talking about? I've spent my life, the last 26 years helping people, have healthy lifestyles and dealing with their stress and their pain and all these different things. And how in the world could I have ended up with lung cancer as a never smoker? Not that that means anything other than the fact that I didn't smoke, because people that don't smoke can get lung cancer, as we know, just as people who do. So I just never knew that I could get lung cancer.
As somebody in health and wellness, I'd imagine you're very in tune with how you're feeling. What were the signs and symptoms that led to your eventual diagnosis?
The first thing that I noticed was when I worked out a lot. I was in a circuit weight training class that I did twice a week. And I would say that the Thursday of the prior week, I was doing some sit-ups and it was really painful. I couldn't do the sit-up. So I didn't necessarily think a lot about that other than that I might have pulled a muscle. But the following week, I was scheduled to go see my my herbologist that I always kept up with health from a I don't want to say an alternative, but a complementary place. I knew how complementary treatments interacted with our health. So I was on my way to see her. I got there, I told her what was going on. We talked about my symptoms, and what came to me was a experience that I had with a client of mine who was complaining about when they would take a deep breath, they could, it hurt. And I said, well, isn't that interesting? Because if I take a really deep breath, I get this pain, on the right side. Now, then I think a couple nights before, I was having pain in that area. And right side, and I was thinking maybe it's gallbladder, maybe it's, last thing I was thinking was lung, right? So I was thinking all these other things. I was experienced with GERD. I experienced GERD over several years before this. And I thought, okay, well, that's just what it is. But once we were talking about it and putting some things together, she said, I really think you need to go to urgent care, and just rule out a pulmonary embolism was what we were thinking. So when I got to the ER, they, I told them all these things and they nodded and took a bunch of blood tests and decided, yeah, let's do a quick x-ray and see what's going on. Well, it took forever for them to actually have all obviously the results come back. I asked them to run a D-dimer, which is a test that will tell you if there's, usually they do that with pulmonary embolisms. They will take a D-dimer. Well, my D-dimer was way off the chart. Once we knew about the D-dimer, we could see the shadow in my upper right lung. And from there on, it was to the emergency room where I had a CT scan. And fairly soon after that diagnosis. So yeah, I had no coughing. I didn't have any of the symptoms that you would typically experience with lung cancer. So there was no blood, there was no coughing. It was just intermittent pain, in that right section of my upper abdomen, chest. So, and what I've come to find out later was that I had a pleural effusion. So my cancer had metastasized to my pleura, which meant that I was stage 4.
You being someone in the health and wellness field, also having worked with cancer patients and helped them, with mobility as well as a wellness routine, among other things. How were you able to come down to earth and get to business? What was helpful?
I would say it took a while because I had to come to grips with my anger, I think was the initial thing. And I went right to anger. I didn't go through some of the other things. I was just like, I cannot believe that I'm having to do this. It's like, this really this one. And so once I came to a realization that why not me, instead of why me, why not me, nothing signals me out to have been special, not to have a cancer diagnosis. So once I came to terms with that, then it was like, okay, now what do we do with this? What can I make of this experience? What does this experience have to offer me? And I look at that as an offering. What's the, I always said, what's the potential? What's the possibility of having lung cancer? And so in the beginning, I even had, and I don't have it here, but the name that I gave my teams when I would do walks, was a lung cancer support walks, for raising monies for research and advocacy. I'm sorry, awareness, research and awareness. I named my team the possibilities. That way, I had hats that said possibilities across it, and that was why. It was okay. So I have this. So what do I do from this day forward? I knew from my experience in where my passion was, one of my passions was that, this was an opportunity for me to be able to bridge modern medicine, allopathic medicine with complementary treatments, and how to best support not only my physical body during these treatments, but my mental, emotional, spiritual self as well. Because I truly believe that it's all connected. I don't think we can separate that out because life affects all of those, and cancer just shines a spotlight on all of those as well. So I immediately made an appointment with an acupuncturist that I knew, and said, okay, I need to be, this is one of the areas that I really haven't focused on. I want to see where acupuncture, where that role can be played in my treatment. And I looked at it more from a standpoint of, if I'm going to be able to handle the treatments that are given, and because I did my research, I knew how strong these drugs were. I had to be able to support my body in a way to be able to give the drugs the best opportunity to work. My trainer, actually, my physical trainer, knew someone at the University of Colorado, and said, we need to, she said, I really want you to connect with him and be able to go to the University of Colorado for at least a second opinion. So I called and made an appointment with Dr. Ross Camage at the University of Colorado before I ever saw my oncologist at Kaiser. I had that second opinion lined up. And what I learned from both of them, which has changed the trajectory of not only my cancer, but I think other people's cancer as well, was that it was incredibly important that I get next generation sequencing testing.
Can you tell us what you mean by next generation sequencing? What are the different types, or at least the types that you've had?
Next generation sequencing is, or sometimes it's called comprehensive genomic profiling. Some people will call it biomarker testing. So when people talk about any of those three things, we're basically talking about the same thing. We had to go in and do a core tumor biopsy to get the right mutations that we knew that were driving my cancer. So that's what happens when you get this kind of testing, is what they're looking for is what is driving your cancer. Everyone's makeup is different, but usually there is something that stands out in the laboratory as they're doing the testing as like, this is your driver. At the time, we initially did an FNA, when I was diagnosed, when I was staged, they did what they call an FNA, fine needle aspiration, which goes into the lymph node and takes out a little bit of fluid, and they tested it that way. It came out and said, I don't have any targeted mutations. And both my oncologists said, we need a core tumor biopsy, to really delve into the specifics of what's driving your cancer. We need to know a little more information. So I did get a core tumor biopsy of the primary tumor in my right lung. We sent that to Foundation Medicine, and they did my genomic profiling. And I want to, specify genomic profile versus genetic, right? Because there is a difference. Genetic is, what's passed on from your family, and what could be going on in the genes, from a genetic standpoint. And genomic, or any of those other three that we talked about, NGS, comprehensive genomic profiling, biomarker testing, are looking for different things. They're looking for the drivers. Foundation Medicine found a novel mutation as my driver. I'm not in the cosmic database, so I'm a one-off, as they say. I'm patient zero. Dr. Camage calls me patient zero.
On a 1 to common, 10 to rare scale, you've often said you're a 10 on the rarity side.
Yeah, I'm about as, I haven't found, there hasn't yet been someone else that has been tested with my specific mutation. Having said that, we knew that there were potentially some commonalities. And so the question was then, how do we treat this?
For our benefit, can you describe your biomarker mutation driver?
It is an EGFR, just plain EGFR, ERBB4. So EGFR with HER4. And if I get this right, the way it was explained to me is that ERBB1, EGFR, intracellularly fused with HER4, which, they kind of look at and go, how in the world did that happen? We don't know how that fusion happened. And, as I was told, it's like, we really don't know how to treat you. We don't know what will be the best, treatment avenue for you. So we have to go with standard of care. So 4 rounds of carboplatin and Alimta. At the time, Keytruda was not standard of care. Now, if I were diagnosed with the same thing now, it would be very different. And so 4 rounds, and then 3 rounds of Alimta as maintenance after that, before I had progression back into the pleura, is where we noticed it. That's usually if I start to notice pain, that's where I will notice it.
Both oncologists, they recommended next generation sequencing for you. This is becoming more common as a first step for a recently diagnosed person. However, it's not 100% widespread across the board. How important is that for a newly diagnosed person to insist upon?
It is absolutely imperative, in my opinion, especially with lung cancer. Every single lung cancer patient, that should be the first step, in my opinion. Absolutely 100%, because that will drive, that will tell your oncology team what treatment you should be on. We now know that if you have a targeted mutation, a lot of first-line treatments are targeted treatments.
You mentioned tissue samples being sent off for next-generation sequencing to Foundation specifically. Have you ever had a liquid biopsy?
I have not. Okay. I have not. And the reason that I have not, the tumor has to be shedding DNA material for it to be picked up in a liquid biopsy. Even if they were able to find it in, they're not looking for my mutation, right? I mean, it's like they're not looking for that. But what we also know about lung cancer is it can change mutations. So we can, you find resistance mechanisms for whatever treatment you could have been on. And so it might pick up that. Now, I'm really excited also about what's happening in ctDNA findings to let patients know whether their treatment is working, on a quicker level, so that you can be looking at, okay, so what's next?
Circulating tumor DNA is what ctDNA stands for. And we're starting to see those measurements be able to, explain whether or not a treatment is affecting your cancer positively, whether or not a treatment is providing a benefit at all. These types of measurements are going to be standard of care within the next 5 years, very likely. And that is through taking a blood sample, correct?
Correct. That, they can find that within. So instead of having to wait for a scan, to see if your cancer is progressing, they would be able to take your blood and go, okay, so maybe it's not a lot, but there's some, we know that something is happening here. Let's look at what else is in the pipeline. So again, staying one step ahead of your cancer, which, that's kind of been my MO, stay one step ahead. I say, you have to stay one step ahead. I needed to stay one step ahead so that science could catch up with me. It's like, just keep me alive until science catches up with me.
In the lung cancer world, ENHERTU is a newly FDA-approved drug as of August 2022 for HER2 mutated NSCLC. ENHERTU is an antibody drug conjugate, or ADC. ADCs are a very exciting new class of drug. They have a unique construction that combines an antibody, which will bind to the target antigen of a cancer, a linker that will connect that antibody to a cytotoxic agent, and then, finally, the toxic drug, which will kill cells upon which the antibody has bound. These ADCs combine high selectivity with a high cell-killing potential and are very exciting for a growing list of cancers. So, in theory, the drug approach limits side effects whilst also increasing the potency of the cell-killing agent. ENHERTU was originally FDA approved for treatment of HER2-positive breast cancer. And in unison with the trials around breast cancer, which led to an FDA accelerated approval, among other epithets, were the lung trials. And you took part in the Destiny Lung 01, which was the phase 1 trial of ENHERTU for NSCLC patients.
I was randomly assigned to either the 5.4 milliliters or the 6.4. I was in 5.4, so I got the lesser dosage with that. I mean, I was 18 months on 16 months in clinical trial, and then I had progression at 16 months, but it was what we call oligometastatic progression. I progressed in both ovaries. And so, and the rest of my body stayed stable. So the thought at that time was, let's take my ovaries out. Let's take the ovaries out, because that's where the growth is happening. And ENHERTU still seems to be working. So let's keep on ENHERTU, which then became, had the approval, so I could do that. I was off the trial back at Kaiser for those last 2 months of ENHERTU. Before I had, long story short, they were only able to get, when I had the surgery, they were only able to get out one of my ovaries. The cancer, and you'll hear this more with maybe with some people, and we talked about it earlier, cancer can cause necrotic or sclerotic tissue, right? It can kill tissue along the way. and it caused scar tissue. Well, I had a significant amount of scar tissue because of the amount of cancer that I had in my abdomen initially. The scar tissue was so dense that she couldn't get through it to find my right ovary. She was able to get my left ovary out, but after 5.5 hours in the operating room, she had to give up on the right one. Mm-hmm. So we had to leave it. You know, and then
you almost got a full night's sleep, it sounds like. You know,
yeah, exactly. Well, and I ended up, it was supposed to be, you know, day surgery, you know, and I was supposed to go home, and I ended up having to spend the night. So that having cancer in my abdomen has caused a couple different things. That was the first one. The second one was I ended up with a partial small bowel obstruction at one point as well.
And we've seen that in other patients as well.
Yep. And what we knew is that, you know, if it had been a total bowel obstruction and if it didn't resolve on its own, typically what they do is surgery to remove that blockage. Well, we knew that surgery wouldn't work with me because my bowels are basically fused together. There's no way to piece them apart. You know, the scar tissue is so intense. So, you know, it was a long 6 days in the hospital, you know, waiting to see if that was going to resolve on its own. Again, I was told, you know, get your affairs in order. You know, this is not good. If it, you know, I was waiting at that time to find out if I was going to be able to get Mobocertinib.
Okay, so you know, as far as ENHERTU goes, you were on ENHERTU as a part of the trial for a period of, it sounds
16
like
months.
16 months prior to these complications and this hospital stay.
Yes, we were. Yeah, that's exactly 16 months in clinical trial. And then let's get the ovaries out, start back on ENHERTU, and see where that takes us.
What can a patient who's beginning ENHERTU expect?
Well, infusion day was always a very, very long day, especially in the beginning. You go in for lab work to start with. So, you know, for me, I have, you can see I have a power port here that I had put in when I was doing chemo. My veins are very small, and my team, you know, infusion team was like, "Oh, Peggy, please go get a port," because I mean, it would be 5-6 times, and you know, it's like, gosh, we can't, you know, if we can't find a vein, you know, we can't give you the treatment. So
it's difficult to find a patient who doesn't love their port.
Yes, that's exactly right. And I've had it now for over 6 years now. I've had the same port. So you go in, you get blood drawn. Take a sip of water here. You get blood drawn. That takes about an hour to come back. And then I would have I would start with my clinical trial team. So I would get an EKG each time. So they would do the blood draw, the EKG. With these drugs, the HER2 drugs, there can be cardiotoxicity, what they call cardiotoxicity. And so what they're really looking at is that QT prolongation in the EKG and how that, you know, shows you don't want to go beyond a certain level of QT prolongation. So every time I would go in, they would do an EKG. And in the beginning, they would do, I believe, an EKG while I was getting treatment and again after the treatment was finished.
And that would be as a part of the trial and part of the pharmacokinetics, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
So if I'm having ENHERTU in a non-trial setting now as a patient, I wouldn't expect to have that level of EKG testing. I may have EKG testing as a general course of my infusion day or treatment regimen because of the potential complications, cardiac complications, right?
That's correct. And, it's important to keep in mind too, that these cardio toxicities can prop up even after you're off treatment. So it's something to always keep in mind with HER2 treatments from what my oncologist has said. So that's something to keep in mind with HER2. And I know that they have found that also with breast cancer patients, trastuzumab, which is part of the ADC, right? It's trastuzumab deruxtecan with a linker. So it was a long day. It's you go, you sit in the chair. For me, I would get 3 different drugs beforehand. So I would always get dexamethasone as a steroid. I would get a specific anti-nausea drug, and then I would also get Benadryl. So, it was like the steroids would hype me up. The Benadryl would, put me to sleep. So it was like, there was always this feeling of, where am I coming or going? Right. And so after a while, that balances out. So 3 different drugs, before they even start the ENHERTU. And like I said, I was on the lower dosage, which I am grateful for. Actually, now that's the protocol for HER2 positive ENHERTU. Now it is 5.4.
During the trial, the higher dosage was associated with a low incidence, but certainly an incidence of ILD and pneumonitis.
Right.
And so this lower dosage that you are on is now the standard of care. Is that correct?
That's correct. And ILD, interstitial lung disease, is something that they look for with many different chemotherapy treatments, especially with lung cancer patients. They keep a good eye on that, along with pneumonitis. Sometimes they use them interchangeably, but there seems to be a different. Had that happened, I think there was a possibility they would take me off treatment for maybe 1 cycle, start me on steroids every day, to reduce that inflammation, because it's an inflammatory process in the lung. And then I had heard that some people were able to go back on the drug at a lower dosage, but since I was already on the 5.4, I don't know that would have been, a thing that was available to me.
And so how long was the ENHERTU infusion generally?
Your first one is an hour and a half. The very first one is an hour and a half. And then if you do okay, they take it down to 30 minutes. Now, that didn't work for me. I tended to have slower infusions with every treatment I was on. It's like I'd have to say, you got to slow it down. You've got to do it at least over an hour. So I would always ask for an hour, to have that drug infused. There shouldn't be any issue. People should know that. You can ask if you don't like the way you feel, during an infusion. For me, what I would always notice, my telltale sign if I was going to have an infusion reaction, was I could feel my heart rate increase. Sometimes there's a rash that you break out in, and hives. And so what they'll do is turn off the infusion, wait until everything comes back to baseline, and then they'll start it at a much lower rate. And so for me, it was always, let's just, we don't need to do that again. We don't need to experiment with me. I already know. So I always push. Now, if I'm going to have an infusion, let's just take it at a lower rate. It wasn't all day at the clinic. It was anywhere from, if the doctors were running on time and everything went perfect, I would say it was a at the least amount 5 hours. Generally, it would go up to 8 hours.
Prior to your experience with ENHERTU, you had multiple other infusion regimens, 5 prior to the ENHERTU. What was it like versus, say, a traditional chemo regimen after infusion day? That is the few days at home that patients who've gone through infusion chemo know so well.
With chemo, typically you're doing a dose of steroid before your treatment, and then for 3 days after, typically. I found the same. I have a love-hate relationship with steroids. So if I can avoid them, I try to. I would find that once I was finished with the steroids, the 3 days of steroids, and I would try and do a lower dosage if I could, I would just crash, after that, and part of that was the steroid crash, right? Because you do, it hypes you up so much, and then all of a sudden you take that steroid out, and it's what we call the steroid crash. You get this bright red face, moon face, that's lovely to have. And then it would take me, sometimes after chemotherapy, I would notice it from day 3 to day 10 a lot of times. I mean, it would take a good 10 days. Now, that doesn't mean I was in bed that whole time. It was, a lot of times, and some days it would, some days the fatigue would be so bad that it would be like, and I would call it, I tell my husband, I just got to go horizontal because I can't be upright right now. So with ENHERTU, it was fatigue on steroids in a sense. I mean, ENHERTU for me was tough, and ENHERTU for me also, that was the only time I experienced that kind of nausea. They typically, while you're getting ENHERTU, you cannot have IV infusion, right? They mix ENHERTU with a glucose-based fluid. That's how they mix the ENHERTU. So you can't have it with an IV, a typical IV, sodium IV. But it also causes a significant amount of dehydration. At least it did for me and for other people that I've known who've been on ENHERTU. So I would time it at about day 3 and day 5. I would go in and get a liter of fluids. I would have my doctor set it up. I would go in on day 3 and day 5, have a liter of fluids, and hopefully that would help balance out, the nausea specifically.
And this was after every infusion. So, that was part of your standard cycles. The 3rd day and the 5th day after infusion, you would go and get a liter of saline
fluids. Exactly. And I can remember having to educate the infusion center. That's kind of like, well, why aren't you drinking water? And it's like, you don't understand. I can't drink enough water. The nausea is so bad that I can't literally force enough fluid down to be able to stay hydrated the way that I need to stay hydrated. It didn't affect my appetite per se. In fact, I gained probably 30 pounds when I was on ENHERTU between the steroids. Take into account too, with a clinical trial, you're getting more frequent CT scans. And the trial sponsor wanted CT scans with contrast. Well, I have a contrast allergy. And so I would have to pre-medicate with 150 milligrams of prednisone over 13 hours before I could get that scan. And so every 6 weeks,
150.
150.
That's a big dose.
It's a big dose. It was a big dose. So every 6 weeks I was doing that. Plus add in every 3 weeks getting dexamethasone with my treatment. So I had, there was a lot of steroid use during that time period for me. And some trial sponsors you can work with on that, but the way this trial was set up, it was CT with contrast. So for me to be able to be in the trial, I had to agree to that, and I did, of course. But there was a big weight gain with that.
Well, steroids, while they're a miracle for a lot of they're indicated for a lot of things.
Yep.
They do have some side effects, like any other treatment. So you mentioned nausea was your number one, and then you had fatigue. Those are both over 50% of ENHERTU patients experience that. Number 3 is alopecia or hair loss. Did you experience any?
With ENHERTU,
yes.
I experienced thinning, but I mean, like I think I told you before, I've lost my hair twice during, we tried to challenge ramucirumab, and instead of Taxotere, we did Taxol. And so that was the second time that I lost my hair. So I was prepared to lose my hair with ENHERTU, but it actually, I had thinning, but I didn't lose my hair for the third time. So
right now it sits at around 40 to 45% of ENHERTU patients you lose their hair. Some of the other side effects associated with ENHERTU can only bear out via blood work, such as leukopenia, neutropenia. Were there any irregularities on your blood work while you were on trial on the drug?
I don't think I ever had it so low that they wouldn't do a treatment on ENHERTU. So, we've learned different ways to manage that low blood count.
Right.
That
platelets,
that are
neutrophils.
Neutrophil, yeah, they can do that. I never had that done. I relied during clinical trial, and this was okayed by my oncology team. I took a supplement called Maro Plus, and specifically, it's a Chinese herbal medication. And I told my oncology team about it. Sent the bottle to the pharmacy. She looked at it and said, we don't see anything that would be contraindicated, but we can't tell you, because we've never tried it before. I would always notice. Now, take in mind that, the nausea, I had to balance taking the herbals with the nausea. So sometimes that was played a role in it. But that throughout my whole chemotherapy, there were a couple times, there was only once on Taxotere that I was not able to get treatment because of neutropenia. And I have, used this herbal medication for many different treatments. So I found that helped. Acupuncture helped. The other thing that can help is physical exertion before you get that blood test. So I have known people that would go in and get a blood test, and they go, yeah, your white blood cell count, your red blood cell count is too low. We have to wait. And they'd say, no, let me go take a walk. Let me go walk up and down the stairs a couple times. Give me 20 minutes. I'll be back, and let's try it again. And there is research out there that says, yep, that will help raise your blood counts.
Well, as we said at the beginning of this is not professional medical advice. And I think that, there's a lot of cases where tips and tricks are extremely helpful for some people and not helpful for others. Right. So it's important that we all share in the cancer community. We all share what's working for us, because there could be someone else out there that it works for. In the case of exercise affecting blood test results, if your oncology team doesn't feel it's safe for you to undergo treatment on a particular day, then that's the law. But
Exactly.
but being able to help your blood test results in a trial setting where the oncology team feels it's safe, but your numbers aren't making it, is something that I personally have experienced. So I totally understand. And the advice to do a little bit of exercise or exertion to raise certain values in your blood test, I think is fairly sound. Getting the blood flowing is going to start, it's going to make you healthier. And that's what the blood
Right.
test is there to represent, is how healthy are your systems and are they healthy enough to take on this treatment? So I find no issue with that.
I want to qualify that a little bit by saying, if my blood test, let's say, for me, my cutoff was let's say 1,000 or 1. We would look at it and go 1. If it was 5 or 0.5, I would say no. My system is too depleted for that. If it was 0.9 and, I just needed 0.1%, sure, then it was like, give me 20 minutes, and I know I can do it there. But you're absolutely right. If your system is showing that it is stressed to a point where your blood work is saying, this is not right, and having that infusion is going to deplete it even more. There's nothing wrong with waiting a week.
In summation on your experience with ENHERTU, if a patient is facing their first infusion of ENHERTU, are there some things, some preparation rituals and or products that they might want to look at to help make their ENHERTU journey easier?
Yes. I will always fall back, at this, on this topic, to what I know about complementary treatments. So let's say for me, because I could at times experience anxiety, going into an infusion, if I'd had a bad experience the time before. There are, I traveled, well, I had a bag that I called my treatment bag, and so I would use the same one every time I would go in. I would have things like a snack in there. I would have a bottle of water in there. I would have a sweater or a wrap in there, even though they're really good about bringing you warm blankets if you need it, which is great. I always had a little bottle of lavender essential oil. Lavender for me helps calm my central nervous system. So I would take the lavender and put it at my pulse points, here, or at my elbow pulse points, sometimes, behind my ear. And I could do that, several times during the treatment if I felt like I needed it. Like if I just could feel my anxiety level go up. I don't know how you can not go through this type of upheaval in your life without some form of anxiety. And so initially I thought, I'm strong enough, I'll just power through this. And then I got to the point where, no, that obviously this is not working. I need some help. So when I go in for acupuncture, I have them do stress points. I have little ear seeds in my ear at what they call the Shenmen point, right here, that I have her put little beads in, on little stickers. And, if I feel stressful, I can just press those points. That's the stress point. Sometimes she puts needles in there. There are also other stress points that you can work with throughout the body that will help just calm that overall sense of, I don't know that I can do this again, because there's going to be times when, either before you go or while you're sitting in that chair, that you go, how much more can I do? I really wish, and there's that sense of, gosh, I just really wish I didn't have to do this. I wish I didn't have to do this. And yet, you work through that. For me, it's like, yep, I'm, yeah, absolutely. I wish I didn't have to do this. And yet I'm here. So how do I deal with that? So stress points, also, there's a stress point here, what they call large intestine 3, large intestine 6 right here. That is a stress point. And I used to tell my clients, if they were suffering from headaches, this was always a point that I would give them to just, just hold it. Sometimes you can manipulate it. You can squeeze a little bit, do a circular motion, here, right. It's right in the web between your thumb and your first finger. That helps. That helps with stress. And of all things, if you're constipated, that's a great constipation point, which in HER2 can cause some constipation. So be aware of that.
Yeah, about 20% of ENHERTU patients experience constipation. You had mentioned dehydration in particular, so much so that you had requested on your 3rd and 5th day post ENHERTU infusion to have a liter of fluids. Were there any other things that you used at home to combat dehydration other than drinking lots of water?
There are some electrolyte drinks that can help with constipation. For me, magnesium was a big help with constipation. I found a supplement through my acupuncturist that worked really well for me. That was magnesium, and so I would incorporate that. Because especially after I had the small bowel obstruction, constipation was a big deal. I had to really be careful with constipation. So magnesium is, and you've heard of milk of magnesia.
Right.
People,
I was going to say,
yeah,
magnesium.
Milk of magnesia.
Yeah.
So magnesium is a go-to, and just try and get as much water in as you can. I would have a bottle that's a full liter, and so the recommendation is that you drink 2 liters a day at least. And sometimes I couldn't even get a half a liter in. The nausea would be so bad I couldn't even get a half a liter in. But I would. That was my. It's like I have it there. I at least get through 1.5 if I can, and on a perfect day I could get through 2. So be able to have a measure of how much water you're drinking, because we forget, and keep it with you. Sometimes it would be like just the taste of the water was really bad for me, so I would I found these drops that I could put in that were flavored. They weren't sugar, but I think they were stevia based. And so they're fruit and stevia. So that would help. If it tasted better, I could get more fluid in, I could get more water in.
ENHERTU, and really the antibody drug conjugate world is something that's very new. When you talk to a lot of the pharmaceutical scientists that are working in this field, they see ADCs as a very important new class of drugs. And so ENHERTU is one of the first. Shifting gears to Peggy's next treatment and current treatment, Mobocertinib. Now it's branded EXKIVITY, and it is an oral, as in pill form, TKI, or tyrosine kinase inhibitor, that is designed to target EGFR exon 20 insertion positive NSCLC. Tyrosine kinase inhibitors are targeted drugs that block enzymes carrying signals that tell cells to grow. Peggy, you had 6 infusion treatments in your cancer journey prior to joining the esteemed Mobocertinib patient user group. and in particular, joining us at the Exon 20 group and ICAN. Tell us a little bit about how your team identified mobocertinib as an option for you.
At the end of my clinical trial at the university, we were looking at potential next treatments because we did know that I had progression on my ovaries. And so at that time, we discussed potentially, well, first of all, I knew I was going to have to leave the university because I would no longer be in a clinical trial there. But we talked about what, they're always my second opinion and typically my go-to. So we talked about different treatments that could potentially work for me. One was what I chose, staying on ENHERTU, but getting the surgery to take out my ovaries for oligometastatic disease and stay on ENHERTU. So that's what I chose. But the other option that was suggested at that time was mobocertinib. Now, knowing that the FDA has only approved mobocertinib in second line for EGFR exon 20 insertions, we knew that I couldn't get the drug through insurance that way.
Right, traditional channels.
Traditional channels. I do not have, I don't have the exon 20 insertion mutation. So, but my oncologist, Dr. Patil at the University of Colorado, said, it could work. I don't know. I can't be 100%. What I would suggest is we could try it. And maybe in 4 weeks, we would do another scan. If your cancer had continued to progress, then we would have to change treatments right away. And I kept that in my back pocket, that knowledge in my back pocket. So I did the ENHERTU for another 2. I did have the surgery. Then after, I think, 2 more ENHERTU treatments, I was in the hospital with the small bowel obstruction. And we knew also at that time that the cancer was progressing in my lung, back in my lung. So we knew we were going to have to change treatment. So at that time, I started, okay, how do we get mobocertinib? Let's give it a try. I'm willing to give it a try. So we went through all the rigmarole, everything I had to go through to get it, compassionate use. Takeda, bless their hearts, took me on, and I started on the 160 milligrams, so the 4 capsules a day. I started on that and was able to do that for a year at the highest dosage. And then we decided to drop it down to 3 to help with the side effects.
What side effects did you experience with mobocertinib?
Side effects of mobocertinib, the diarrhea is intense. It can be intense. So,
and when does that set in? After you took your first day of Mobo, when did the diarrhea begin?
I would say it was day 4. I want to say day 4, day 5, something like that. And I'd take into consideration too, this was my very first oral drug.
Right. You had 6 infusion treatment cycles.
6 infusion treatments.
Not cycles, but 6 years, 6 infusion, almost
6 years.
To have that control at home must have been really freeing.
Yes and no. Because here's the thing. Here, I had 6 years of experiencing going into the cancer care experience, and I've got this whole group of people, right? I've got my docs, I've got my nurses, I've got my infusion team, I've got my clinical trial team, I've got, and later on, but there was always someone there that if I were to have an infusion reaction, they knew exactly what to do. They knew how to take care of me. Taking my first oral drug, It was like I'm kind of like, oh my gosh, it's like they delivered it to my front door, and I picked up, this bottle of chemotherapy basically at my front door, and they said, take it. And I'm like, but what? I don't have any, I don't know what this is going to be like. I don't know what happens if something bad, happens. So it took me about an hour and a half to be able to take that first dose. And, I sat in my husband's office and, took a book and, read, and, he kept looking over at me to make sure I was doing okay. And thank goodness it was. Now, in hindsight, it is freeing. It is absolutely freeing. In fact, I have to put reminders in my calendar to call my oncology team and say, okay, I need to get set up for blood work. I need to get set up for an EKG. I need to, I need to schedule scans, and for me, because I'm, I've always been so involved in my treatment that I don't typically wait for them to call me. I call them. Well, I literally had to make, notes, to say, oh, I got to call them, because Mobocertinib has worked like the miracle drug they hoped it would be for me. So at my first scan, all of the hotspots, all of the avid on PET scan, because I typically have PET scans because I don't have to pre-medicate for that. And so with a PET scan, you can see in the body where the cancer is active. And, they have a measurement for that, and it's the SUV, the avid SUV. So when I had my scan before I started the Mobocertinib, literally it looked like, and my doctors, I had my doctor for 6 years, have this great relationship with him. And anyway, it's like, it looks like a war zone in there, and I was like, yeah, it certainly did look like a war zone in there. And then that first scan, and I think because I was feeling so good, we waited 8 weeks to do it. And there were, I think, only three spots that showed slight SUV activity. And so, literally, it
down
was
from how many spots?
Oh, I
numerous,
had
as the radiologist might put. Numerous.
Exactly, numerous.
Right.
Yeah. In my abdomen, there were a couple of bone lesions that had never been there before. Mm-hmm. In my lung, in the spots that we knew were there in my lung, and even into my left lung. So we knew that the cancer was progressing, and it's like it's dark in there right now. And I had 2 lymph nodes and 1 small spot in my lung after 2 months of being on Mobocertinib. It worked that quickly for me. Was it worth it to me to deal with the side effects? And it's like, yeah. And I know about that, what was happening with the docs, and with Mobocertinib, and through in my expertise, my experience with Mobocertinib. And I was like, you cannot withdraw this drug. This drug is my miracle drug, and also other people that I know. And if you're going to rest on the toxicity of a drug, talk to me about the other 6 treatments I've been on and the toxicity I experienced with those. This isn't any worse. It's different, but it's not worse. We can manage that.
While constipation is the hallmark of many other types of treatment, in particular chemo regimens, traditional chemo regimens, TKIs, or such as Mobocertinib and a few of its cousins that are out there, tend to go the other way. What did you find really successful in helping you to manage diarrhea?
I was pre-warned about the diarrhea and how to initially take the drug. So they suggested that I start on antidiarrheals before I actually took the drug. I didn't want to overtake it, because I also had, I had to worry about, constipation as well. So it was for me, it was like, okay, this could go many different ways for me. So I had to be really careful with that. But I also got on with, was speaking with a nutritionist. We were talking about what nutritional things I needed to be worried about. Now, the thing about diarrhea and the diet that they put you on for potential bowel obstructions are kind of the same. So it's rice, it's bread, it's applesauce, it's all those things that one would consider, well, that's not a very healthy diet, right? So I had to look at different ways to get my nutritional needs met. So I had already changed my diet to something that it didn't feel so foreign. I eat lots of rice with it, things that I know are binding, right? The Enterade, my nutritionist told me about Enterade. And so I would drink a bottle in the morning and a bottle in the evening. And I did that for many, many months, and then dropped down to a half a bottle a day, a half a bottle in the morning and a half a bottle at night. That has helped too. And that, I must say, has helped with the dehydration too, because you have to be very, very careful when you have that kind of diarrhea that you're replacing your fluid intake. Mm-hmm. So this is where electrolytes come in. This is where amino acids come in. So I drink, if I'm having a day or several days where I've either eaten, too much fiber or too much sugar, will do it as well, then I will have potentially a bad day. And so electrolytes, replacing those electrolytes is so important. It's so important. Dehydration, again, is so important. I have not had, now I take that back. I think in the beginning, I went in a few times for IV fluids. And I haven't had to do that in quite a while. I've been able to manage that. How much antidiarrheal do you take? Being careful with the antidiarrheals at the same time as managing what I eat with mobocertinib. So it's with any cancer treatment, you're going to have to learn and hopefully in with a good a nurse navigator or your doc or your nutritionist, someone that can help you navigate, these side effects, whether it is in palliative care or supportive care, as they call it some places. The thing about palliative care or supportive care is it's not hospice. Remember that. Their specialty is dealing with side effects of treatment. So use them. They have a wealth of knowledge with how to manage many different aspects of your treatment plan. So I was able to stay on the 160 with the help of acupuncture, with antidiarrheals, with diet. Not to say that I didn't have some bad days. Of course I did, and I still do. But we also decided to take my dosage down to 120. I would say also that mobocertinib, I have runny nose, and I know other
you
people
mentioned that at the beginning of our interview today.
All of a sudden it'll just be like, oh my gosh, who turned the fountain on?
Sure.
And it's not all the time, it's just sometimes. So I walk around with, I feel like my grandmother with my tissue underneath. My grandmother used to have a tissue in her sleeve at all times, but I've noticed that there are times when it will affect my skin. I'll get these small breakouts on my face, especially if I have been out in the sun too much. I have to be really careful with that. So sunscreen is really important. Sometimes I'll get a rash, that's itchy. And so making sure I stay hydrated, skin hydrated, is really important.
You also spoke a little bit about the hair changes. Can you provide a little more detail on that?
Yeah, it's been quite the change with my hair. When I lost my hair before on chemotherapy, it came back very straight and very gray. And so I thought, well, okay, well now I'm gray. Now I've reached that. With mobocertinib, it became a little coarser. My hair became coarser. It became very curly, and it came back in my natural color. My husband and I joke about it because it's like I've been this different person, depending on what treatment, I look different depending on what treatment I'm on. So I've been able to experience, all kinds of different things from hairless to going to a wig to going back to, hairless to growing to, and now, having hair again. So it's an interesting education on vanity, any kind of cancer treatment, and I think this is across the board with men and women. I don't think women have a handle on that. It's not their thing per se. I think men experience it as well. But for me, people will see me now and go, God, you look normal. You look like you're doing just fine. And I think there's something about having hair that does that. It's a strange thing, but as lung cancer patients too, and I'm getting a little off topic here, but I think this is important to mention, that as lung cancer patients who are stage 4, people say, well, when are you going to be done? When are you going to be done with treatment? When's chemotherapy over? You look great. And you have to say, I'll probably never be off treatment. I may be able to take breaks, here and there, but I more than likely will never be able to be off treatment. And so it's knowing that and sharing that with people. It's an interesting education process for both the patient and whoever you're talking to, because it brings back the reality of what having stage 4 lung cancer is like.
What else can you say about your experience with mobocertinib and how it's changed your life?
There is a sense of not being as connected with my care team. I must say that. Before I was seeing them every 3 weeks, if not more often. For a while it was, once a week. And with other treatments, sometimes it was every other week. So there is that disconnect for me that I have experienced. There's also a level of being prepared, preparedness when you're having gastrointestinal issues. Before this interview, I didn't eat. I can drink, but I didn't eat, because a lot of times what I find is that eating in the morning will trigger the diarrhea. Now, whether that will last for just one bout or whether that is 3 or 4, is sometimes an unknown. So I have ways that I eat. The timing is different. If I know that I have something that's coming up that I want to be there for, I plan, when I'm going to eat, when I take an antidiarrheal, if I'm going to take it. Before it was, I was taking at least 3 antidiarrheals a day.
And this would be an Imodium
Imodium.
Lomotil.
Yep.
You know, are there any other varieties of antidiarrheal that you would?
Not that I know of that are there. From a dietary place, one of the things that I have found works great for me, if I know that it's going to be a bad morning, I'll start my morning off with cream of rice cereal with a banana and cinnamon, and so there's something about cream of rice for me that will, do a great job. So I keep that in my backpack.
Now you have a blog, theinsightfulbreath.com, that you have updated quite a bit. And in particular, in your early treatment, you would update it on infusion days. Is that correct?
Yes. I would after an infusion, yeah, typically, yeah.
And so this connection to your team is also connection to your blog, because you haven't updated it as regularly while on Mobocertinib. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's so funny that you say that, because I've been getting a lot of backlash about that.
Oh, well.
No, it's fine. It's fine, because what comes up for me is that this is a very real, when you're on a TKI and it doesn't seem as dire as sitting in a chair, and getting chemo, it doesn't feel as emotionally challenging. So one of the things I have found, and I didn't write before my cancer diagnosis. Writing was not my forte. I as an avocation, I've sung professionally for many years, and been several different bands and CDs and different things like that. So that was kind of my outlet, my creative, artistic outlet was using my voice. And this was an opportunity to take that in a different direction. And I think that first of all, it's been very healing for me to be able to share my experience, because I know that some cancer patients don't want anybody to know. They don't feel comfortable sharing. Well, for me, I was on stage for years. It's like I don't have any problem sharing what is going on, because I believe that it is universal. There's a part of what I'm going through that is universal, whether you have cancer or not. And so I try and touch on those things, but you're absolutely right, because I would have this whole day where I would sit in a chair and I'd be looking out the window, and I'd be, in this kind of steroid Benadryl fog, and it was a really great opportunity to see just what came through. And with Mobo, it's kind of like I'm out doing more. I haven't set that time, like I had before. And that doesn't mean, saying that doesn't mean that I'm not experiencing big things still. But there's a part of me that goes, well, people don't want to hear about the mundane of this. And what I'm hearing is that, no, we actually want to hear the mundane. We want to hear that, that there's a better, that you're doing well. And I don't mean that, me personally. It's like, take that to the broader we, not necessarily me, but we, because I've had people say, you speak for me. I know from whence you come. I know what that is like. I know what that feels like. And so I look at it, being able to write, as something that is universal. What I'm experiencing is universal in many different ways. In many different ways, and what a cancer diagnosis will bring up for people. internally, emotionally, spiritually. I think it's been an amazing. I've taken my spirituality and I would say explored it a little bit deeper in a deeper way. It's not so much superficial anymore. It's more experiential. And I thought I was there before. That's the thing. That's the other thing about cancer. It's like, I got that, before. And now it's like, oh, no, you really don't. There's more here. There is so much more here to learn and to potentially share that might impact someone else. And for me, that is what gives me purpose. Before it was being able to have someone on my table and have them walk out of pain. It's like, oh gosh, I feel so much better. And it's like, yay, I did my job. I affected this person, and that made me feel like I had purpose. This is different. This is taking it to a broader, I don't want to say audience, because I don't like to think of it that way. I think that people that find my blog are meant to find my blog. I hope it speaks, to them. I hope that I can share enough of who I am as a human that they recognize themselves in me and my journey.
You did share a tip in terms of dealing with diarrhea that I found is interesting. And you mentioned rice as a big part. Mm-hmm. So nutrition is critical when you're looking at any sort of side effects that you might be having or that you might be experiencing as you jump into a new treatment. Mm-hmm. Rice Krispie treats, which not only follows rice, but also I'd imagine there's quite a few people who might say that's a really, really cool item to have on the menu. Did you find any other sweets or treats that have been helpful in managing diarrhea?
Well, bananas are big, right? Bananas are a good thing. No, the funny thing about Rice Krispie treats is my nutritionist told me about marshmallows. She says,
okay.
You have some diarrhea or upset stomach, whatever, have a marshmallow or two. That'll, calm that. And I thought, and then it was like, oh, why wouldn't we do Rice Krispies treats? That's, again, you don't want to overdo it. So, and then there's all that lovely butter, in there too. So sure. There's a little bit. Bananas, I have found, there is another product out there called Banatol that can be used. There's also some people get really good results with gelatin. So you can just do raw gelatin, mix it into water and use that. Some people do really well with gelatin for diarrhea. For me, I found raw vegetables are not good for me. I was a real salad person before, and now I cannot be. So raw vegetables, some raw fruits are not good. Remember that any fruit or vegetable that starts with a P, pears, peaches, plums, those tend to be good things if you need to soften your stool. So for ENHERTU people or chemo people that are constipated, the pea, vegetables or fruits are really good. If I do eat vegetables, I always cook them. My vegetables are always cooked. My fruits are typically cooked if I use them. With diarrhea, timing again. Being able to time, like if I'm flying, I have to be really careful what I eat on the plane, or not, just keeping things like that. If they offer you a cookie or pretzels, take the pretzels. The pretzels are better for you than the cookie.
You mentioned that you will delay eating in the day. Are there any considerations on when you take your dose of Mobo with respect to, do you take it with food later in the day, or do you try to give yourself a buffer?
I always take it with food. There's some talk about, when you take a TKI, take it with food, take it without food. There's been some clinical trials, suggesting that maybe food and timing is important. So for me, though, I take it at like between 2 and 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And I will take a little bit of something, have it in my stomach, take my drugs, and then eat something, to kind of keep it down.
Sure.
So that's how, and I haven't varied the time ever. I had COVID in June, and I had to be off my chemotherapy for 11 days. That was an intense, mental piece for me. It's like, gosh, don't take away my chemo, but to be able to do the antivirals, to be able to get through the COVID infection with a better outcome, they suggest you go off your chemotherapy. So,
in terms of Mobocertinib, you've called it a miracle drug for you, and I know there are other patients who would say the same. It certainly posted coming out of trial impressive enough response rates that the FDA gave it an accelerated approval, among other epithets. And you have now been on it for almost a year, or over a year?
Over a year, 14 months.
14 months.
14
and
months.
How often are you receiving scans to assess your whether Mobo is providing you benefit?
It's been every 3 months. But I've been getting PET scans. I get my blood drawn between 4 and 6 weeks. Every 4 to 6 weeks, I get my blood drawn. For me, we've always followed my CA2729 tumor marker, as well as my CEA tumor marker. So that has been, we've followed that since diagnosis. So there's a whole nother, video in that, I would say, with tumor markers. But for me, it's been fairly predictive as far as how the treatment, is continuing to work. So I get that done every 46 weeks. I get an EKG at least every 3 months. Every time I go into the doc, I get an EKG. Every 3 months, I'll have a brain MRI coming up in October, as well as my next PET scan, and we'll see. Hopefully, we continue on to this path. I hope to be, talking to you in a year and saying, yeah, it's still working.
Still on Mobo, right?
Still on Mobo, yeah.
And there are patients in the Exon 20 group who have been on Mobo for all the way since the trial.
Yes.
So it's been a miracle drug for them, to the extent of I believe I can think of one patient who's almost coming up to their third year on Mobo. But there are several others in the same category as you here, 1 year plus, and no signs of slowing down. Obviously very encouraging for patients that find potency with Mobo or any of the other TKIs. There's quite a pipeline now that has been tracked through the Exon 20 group and our patient population of similar medications. So similar mechanism of action, TKIs, oral medications, quite a few in trial. Mobo is the FDA approved for Exon 20 insertions, hence why the Exon 20 group has so many of the patient population that are currently taking this drug. Now, this Mobocertinib, this 14 months that you've been on it, this is what brought you to the Exon 20 group. Now, before I ask you about that, I do want to mention for everybody that, in addition to having a great blog that everyone should read if they don't find it already by Googling at theinsightfulbreath.com. You are also on several very influential groups and committees. We at the Exon 20 group have been overjoyed to have a mover and a shaker out of you, Peggy, as a member of the group. And Mobo delivered you to our community and our patients. You know so much about what it's like to be a cancer patient, but then also so much about the experience of moving from a treatment to another treatment. And while you yourself are not an exon 20 insertion patient, you have found a home as one of our leaders in the patient community. And so tell me a little bit about that, finding Exon 20 group and what your experience has been and where you found value.
This is an emotional piece for me. So forgive me if I tear a little bit.
Me too, Peggy. Okay. So I'm with you.
When I first was diagnosed, I sought out everything I could find with other patients, who were out there. I wanted to know the people who were surviving lung cancer. I wanted to know what they had done, where they had been, what brought them to where they were at. And so there were certain people that had blogs. There were other people that had videos, had done videos. And I would follow those people. But I never felt like I belonged to a group, because at that time in lung cancer, and I understand, I totally 100% understand this, but they started splintering off into groups, the EGFR resistors and the ALK positives and the ROS wonders. And I totally understand why they did that, because the funding that goes with lung cancer research a lot of times needs a grassroots place to begin and to go. The Exon 20 group as well. But I never felt like I belonged to any of those groups. I couldn't. I tried getting on their sites, and it didn't speak to me. It wasn't my story per se, because I was like, I couldn't find a common place, even with, I've never been on an immunotherapy. So I couldn't talk to that. And the chemo patients, the ones that were just on chemo, they were on and off very quickly. And so my group, was not there. I didn't have a group. So when I was told that, we're going to try Mobocertinib, I went, okay, so I need to find out, where I need to get back on the EGFR exon 20 group. And I had, in talking with other patients in this area and others, I had directed other people to the exon 20 site, to that site, because it was so specific. So I was aware of it, but I remember talking to Marcia and saying, I'm going to be on, I'm starting Mobocertinib, told her my story. And she said, gosh, you need to get on to this, group that we're forming, that it's a support group, but we're talking specifically about the drugs, what's happening in the pipeline, what's happening. You'll meet people who are on Mobocertinib and hear their story.
Peggy is referencing the Exon 20 Group weekly patient and care partner meetup. And this is a weekly Zoom call where members of our community update each other, discuss treatments, clinical trials, their clinical experiences, and side effect management. Now, it's organized and led by an expert member of the Exon 20 Group leadership team, Karen Susserman. And Karen, she created this awesome one-of-a-kind forum, and it's become an invaluable resource for patients and caregivers in the community. It also happens to be where Peggy and I first met.
I think that we learn so much more from other patients that are experiencing the same things that we are with our drugs. Patients are our best common denominator when it comes to drugs. And as this group, the Exon 20 group, is probably one of the best educated groups I've ever found. And the thing I like about the Exon 20 group, it's just not one or two people. You know, it is many people who are incredibly educated in what they're going through and the drugs that are available, and their fingers on the pulse, because we need to be, right? I mean, with Exon 20, we need to know 100% what's going on with that. And even though I don't have the Exon 20 mutation, what I do have is probably the closest to an Exon 20 HER2 mutation without having it. So that's why we were like, well, let's try Mobocertinib and just see. And, you know, everything, you know, the stars aligned for me. So after 7 years, it's like I found a bigger group. I've always been involved in my local lung cancer support group, which has many, many different people who are trying many, many different kinds of treatment. But this is the first specific group that I've been involved with. So I truly appreciate that. Having said that, you know, when I was working with Survive It, it became more global. You know, it's like we're talking to all different kinds of cancer patients. It's not just lung cancer.
It's in specific to the
in specific
drug track as well as mutation biomarker.
Exactly. With colorectal cancers, pancreatic cancers, breast cancers. You know, it's like, let's, you know, finding people. We all find, I notice in the overall cancer community, we find where we need to be. We find, you know, we're drawn to a certain group for a reason. And so that's what I found with Survive It. I liked being able to talk about next generation sequencing and how it could potentially benefit other cancer types as well. This is what it did for me. This is what I know it has done for other lung cancer patients. This is what they're talking about. This is where they're going with other cancer types. So I think at COVID, I kind of stepped back because I was in the clinical trials with Survive It. And so I'm not on their leadership board any longer with Survive It and then One Cancer Place that they merged with that. But we did some really amazing things when I was with Survive It, and I'm very proud of that. I find that where I'm at today is I now have a more renewed energy level for finding a passion with this work. I think even though how do I even get where I'm thinking I want to go with this? I have been blessed to be able to speak and talk to other people, whether it be in industry or other patients, with my patient story, different opportunities like that. I think that's important. But when I was I was asked by Foundation to speak on their a panel that they host a reception every year at ASCO in Chicago, the Association for Clinical Oncology. It's a big deal at ASCO, to be at ASCO. And I was very honored to be asked to do this. But what I found most impressive that they did is that a lot of times you'll have a pulpit and you'll tell your patient's story, right? You'll tell your story. Well, this was a panel, which was awesome. And I was on a panel with three other oncologists. And I thought, how amazing that we've gone from, here's our patient, let's let her tell her story, to this is our panel. This is how we integrate the patient voice. And, it just gives me so much hope for where cancer research is going, integrating the patient voice, being able to tell our side of the story with it, having oncologists right there on the panel with you that you can look at and look them in the eye and say, this is what it's like. They know, they have patients, they get it, right? And so, but let's be able to bring it together and really have it as a team effort. That's the one thing I looked at when I was first diagnosed. I looked at my oncologist and I said, here's what I need from you. You can tell me if you're my guy, but this is what I need. I need someone who's going to kind of quarterback my team. And that's a term that, that Dr. Camage, coined, is, quarterback of the team. And I said, but I'm the team owner. I own the team. This is me. And so I want to be able to have someone on my team that's truly on my team. I want you to want to be here. I want you to share with me. I want to be able to understand what you're talking about. I like that. I like that piece. I like the science of it. I want to learn about it. I'll do my part. I will do my part. And I want you to be a partner with me. And that's what I see is happening industry-wide now, is like, this is what I think a lot of cancer patients want. Not all of them. I'm not saying this is for everybody, because I do know people that say, I'm sorry, I can't do that. I don't want to know about it. I want someone who I trust that says, you need to do this, and I will say yes. For me, I hear, you need to do this, and I say, why? Sell it to me. Why do you think that? What do you see about me, about where I'm at, about what do you see that you think this will work for? And a good oncologist who's like right there for their patients are willing to go there with them. If I ask, then they're usually willing to go there with me. If I don't ask, then that's on me. And there's no right or wrong to that. There's no right or wrong way to do this. There's only your way. And so that's what I tell other researchers. That's what I tell other patients. Do this your way. This is yours. Do it your way. So if you're a researcher, no one says you have to follow the book. You have an intuition that says, I want to follow this, follow that. You don't know where it's going to go. Same with the patient.
When you talk about the oncologist-patient relationship, it sounds like there's a very big endorsement and shout out for Dr. Patil at University of Colorado. And I apologize, but I believe you have an acronym to describe Dr. Patil.
Actually, you're thinking of Dr. Narayanan. And
Dr. Vignesh.
Yeah, Vignesh.
Yes.
Vignesh was my original, he was my oncologist at Kaiser. Now, the lovely thing about Vignesh is that he worked at the University of Colorado he did his fellowship there in lung cancer oncology. So he knew the guys, at the university, and then he came to Kaiser. And so he was my guy. He was my let's see, my super ninja, most wonderful oncologist is what I called him. So SNM, super ninja, most WO, yeah. And so
it really rolls.
and we always,
Whoa, right?
yeah, it is. No, yeah, exactly. It rolls off the tongue, doesn't
So
it?
getting a second opinion is critical, whether it be a determination of your disease state or a determination of what treatment is next or what treatment is continuing. Leveraging a second opinion also will not offend your current oncologist. And if it does, then maybe they need to be offended, right? But why should a patient who's newly diagnosed with an exon 20 insertion, EGFR or HER2, immediately join the exon 20 group?
If someone came to me and said, I've just been diagnosed, and they tell me that I have this EGFR exon 20 insertion, or sometimes it's a HER2 exon 20 insertion, what should I know about that? And it's like, I've said this before, I immediately say, okay, well, I send them the link, to the exon 20 group. And I say, this is where you're going to find the most up-to-date information about what's going on in your specific cancer driver. I want them to know what the medications are out there. What should they do first? What should they do second? What have other people been on? There's a wealth of information on what other patients have tried. You want to surround yourself with people who have a language that you're going to learn. If you like learning a new language, so these people that you're going to meet, this information that you're going to see, is the language that you're going to be learning. And so there are going to be things we're talking about, and initially you're going to be overwhelmed. It's going to seem like so much, and it's going to seem like for some people, I'm not a medical person, I'm not a science person, I'm not this, I'm not that. And it's like, well, you stick around, in these groups long enough, and you will become one. You find your tribe, basically. You find the group that speaks the language that you're going to be speaking.
I do want to thank you for making the time. This was extremely high information, but also high energy, and I appreciate that, and I'm sure everyone who's watching appreciates it. So thank you for making the time and sharing your story.
Absolutely. It was an honor and a privilege.